Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirant. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So, in this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, author edition, I'm very pleased indeed to be inviting two old friends, not old of course, but friends of long date, in to speak about their latest book. I'm welcoming Michel and Andrés Tapia, who have recently been collaborating on a book. And I'd like, first of all, to welcome the two of you. Thank you for joining me. So, tell us, your book is shortly to be published. Tell us, in very basic terms, what the title is and when it's due to be out.
The book that is coming out is called The 5 Disciplines of Inclusive Teams. It is due to come out March 5th, 2025. But the good news is that it's already available for pre-ordering on Amazon. And so we invite everyone to log in and make sure that you reserve your own copy of our upcoming book.
Fantastic. We will make sure that all the audience has a link to do exactly that. Thank you.
I would add that the subtitle is Unlocking Collective Power to Achieve Breakthrough.
Well, we will hear more in depth what that actually implies as we get into this. So, what need were you addressing as you wrote the book? And given that it's a collaboration, how did you write it?
This is a part of a trilogy that has 2 books before it, the 5 Inclusive Disciplines trilogy. So the 5 Disciplines of Inclusive Leaders, the 5 Disciplines of Inclusive Organizations, and this completes the series of the 5 Disciplines of Inclusive Teams. I had a different co-author for each one of these, and I'll talk about my relationship with Michel in a moment for this particular one. And we wanted to prove several things, that there's a systematic, codifiable way to really create an inclusive organization that requires inclusive leaders leading inclusive teams. And then we wanted to bring in the disciplines and the practices within each discipline to execute that. So think about this at the intersection of the ivory tower and the street. So a lot of research every which way, but also a lot of practicality. And then when it came to inclusive teams, Michel and I set out to crack the code and understand there is a correlation in many other studies that more diverse and inclusive teams lead to better performance, more innovation, higher engagement. But no one has been able to really explain how it happens. And we felt that if we could then codify it and create an accelerated process for these diverse inclusive teams to have those kinds of outcomes much more quickly, much more predictably, much more effectively.
That's really exciting. Wonderful. Thank you. So let's get into the methodology.
Part of the partnership here is that we both have a passion for both the ideas of diversity, inclusion, and teams. Andrés brings lifelong experience and insight on the diversity and inclusion side, and I lead a top team performance practice at Korn Ferry. I've worked with teams for a very long time. And so we've had plenty of conversations where, this book basically was the culmination of all these conversations we had where we were sharing about our respective areas. And so there's an opportunity to really bring these two things together. And it fit perfectly, as Andrés mentioned, with this sort of idea of a trilogy.
We wanted to demonstrate throughout the series and in this book, by partnering the reality of diversity and to find ways to work inclusively, which co-authoring can be tricky, but we have found ways to make it work and be synergistic. So this book is significantly better because there was 2 of us with very diverse backgrounds, different disciplines, different cultural experiences that collaborated effectively on it.
That is beautiful, and it totally answers the question about how you wrote it. Fantastic. Let's move on to the key concepts then, both the concepts and the messages that you have evoked and generated in this book.
I would say there's sort of 3 main components. One is really wanting to contribute some new, fresh thinking that's research-based and practice based on our own experience as practitioners. So a really clear framework to think about to help teams and leaders think about what does an inclusive team look like and what are the true signs and the disciplines that you'll see. And so 5 disciplines, which I'll describe briefly, I'll list them it's connecting, caring, synchronizing, cultural dexterity, and power sharing. The first 2, connecting and caring, actually are a bit different from the other 3 in the sense that they create the necessary conditions for the other 3. So you really have to have a strong sense of connection and caring before you really look into the ways you're going to synchronize, which is, how do you find ways for the team to operate as one team? It's a lot of the work we do with teams is the sense of how does the collective occur? And it's not just that everybody's doing the same thing, but it's this sense of orchestration and the intentionality around the team comes together. Cultural dexterity, we live in a global world. We are a increasingly diverse world. And so that is a really critical discipline to have, to be able to operate, influence, drive results, and bring the team together in that highly diverse context. The last, I think probably our most kind of thought-provoking discipline is the power sharing. It's probably the most difficult one to achieve as well, which is, for team leaders to recognize that their role is always going to be there, but that the true unlock for any team, any particularly inclusive team, is to find ways for power to flow on the team and to have different team members take on leadership roles at particularly given times. And so these are the 5 concepts. Andrés and I put a lot of attention to convert these into specific tips and practices. We wanted to make sure that this was theoretically sound, but also highly practical. And so we put a lot of efforts in defining specific practices and the conditions for increasing kind of those 5 disciplines. And then the second piece is that we also look for implications for 3 areas: the evolution and future of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the future of leadership, and the future of innovation. And then the last component is, because we are practitioners, we want to leave the reader with a blueprint of a journey. What is it going to take? What is it going to take for a team to actually develop as a more inclusive teams using these 5 disciplines?
And if I could elaborate a little bit on what sounds so easy, connecting and caring. And Michel and I make a distinction between the 2. Think about connecting as cognitive empathy and caring more about emotive empathy. And the emotive part makes sense, right? Just really getting to know each other and our identities and what's important to us, and even some personal things that can help us better understand each of us within the work context, because, we are full beings that are affected by what's going on in us. But the connecting, we did some really interesting work on connecting, and it's so simple yet so powerful. If you think about a traditional way in which a team introduces itself to one another when it comes together, what's your name? What's your title? How long have you been here? And it pretty much stops there. But if you think about yourself right now, even the 3 of us, and if we stopped there, how little do we know about each other in ways that are relevant for the work that we're going to have to do together? So one of our tips and techniques is simply to have the team spend 20 minutes to answering this one question. What significant educational work, life experience at any stage of your life have you had that today affects how you approach your work? And I tell you, there's the Peace Corps volunteer, there's the refugee, there's the economist that work in a hyperinflation country, there's a person with a linguist master's that has nothing to do with her role right now. But suddenly you find things out that then when you move into synchronizing and into really trying to do the work and bring the best of the team, and then somebody moves in with power sharing intent to say, well, here's the wordsmithing, just to use a simple example. Well, we can all wordsmith, and we should, but there's a moment where the power should go and flow toward the person who perhaps has the master in linguistics, etc. So that cognitive empathy becomes very important. And I'll tell you one thing, we have done this with senior teams and all kinds of teams at every level. And they turn to us and say, I've worked with this person for 15 years, and I found out something I never knew about them, and that helps me better understand how to better work.
Wonderful. That's a really striking example. So simple, but infrequently done. So this book hopefully will be inciting more people to do it more often. What about some kind of success story or case study? Obviously, we want our listeners to read the book, so you shouldn't be giving away everything, but what would be a great case study to share with us?
So I don't really want to reveal too much, but maybe what I'll say about our case studies actually is the fact that we try to really have diversity in the stories we were telling. And so what the reader will find, first-person stories where we really looked at the experience from the individual leader perspective, for example. But we also have stories about more sub-team dynamics. So what happens on the team and what are some of the unlocks, some of the learning. And so I think that that's really kind of a key takeaway. I'll just maybe use a story. I'm actually wondering if it's in the book, but it's recent. And so it's really very much top of mind for me. But working with an executive team at a PE-backed organization, where it's along the same lines what Andrew said, is I think the big unlock for them was to spend half a morning of a 2-day offsite learning about each other. We call that exercise 15 minutes of fame, where everybody would have 15 minutes to really tell their story. And exactly what Andrew said is that it's this realization that here's someone that I spent a lot of time with, and I had no idea that we share this common experience. Some of these things can get really personal, but that's also kind of where some things can really open up and be truly transformational when you have that awareness that you have those common experiences that are part of your identity and can make things that maybe you thought were not possible now possible.
From a synchronicity perspective, which also I think is one of our other breakthrough innovative dynamics, is leveraging the power of neuroscience that has discovered so much not only about our individual brains and how little we activate through other parts. Like the corporate world over indexes and using the prefrontal cortex, it was just logic and all that stuff. And so in the world of disruption, a lot of executives and team leaders and team members just actually double down on the prefrontal cortex and try to think harder. It's just leading to dead ends. So the idea is to, how do you get teams to activate the parts that are, with music or percussion or humor or the arts or illustration. And so some of our exercises are actually bringing that in. And this right now is still vanguard companies that do it because it's still countercultural, but we believe the science backs us up. And what we've done there has been significant breakthrough in some problem that the team was trying to solve, that just thinking more and doing more flip chart work just was not getting them there. And it opened them up into very new creative ways.
Fantastic. I love all this. Well, I know that many of our listeners are going to be extremely keen to get the real book and the pre-order and everything else. So thank you to both of you for coming to share. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing about this important work.
Thanks for the invitation. It really meant a lot to reconnect with you as well.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.